and welcome to this ET Now special. I'm Nayantara Rai. We have a very big guest with us. It is the Principal Economic Advisor, Sanjeev Sanyal, joining us on the same day that the Economic Survey has been tabled in Parliament. Thank you so much for your time. I know we have very little time with you, so I'll get straight down to it. How would you react to critics who are saying that this time round, the economic survey seeming more like a factual document and not testing the waters with, different kind of theories and models, whether, we've seen in the past with Thalinomics or with, universal basic income or even privatization?
I'm rather surprised by that question because it's clearly from people who haven't read the economic survey. It brings in large amounts of new information. In fact, if you see, the format has been changed. We now have two booklets, but the first one is a text booklet and there is a statistical supplement, which has been very significantly revamped. Similarly, there are lots of new ideas. You will see the use of satellite data, geospatial data, which has been used. There's a whole chapter on that with a lot of images that you'll find interesting, from nighttime luminosity and to images of how cropping cycles pan out and so on. So I'm quite surprised that that has been the case. There are also lots of new reform ideas in there, particularly on process reform, for example, on patenting, on involuntary liquidation. There is a lot of interesting new stuff on the theory of high frequency data and agile policymaking, and the barbell strategy. So a lot of new ground has indeed been covered. If people do bother to read through it, they will discover that it is just replete with new ideas.
Yes, we have seen a lot about tech, startups, innovation there in the economic survey. But one that's grabbing the headlines too, Sanjeev Sanyal, has to do with the projection that has been provided as far as GDP for the next year goes, 8 to 8.5%. Why so conservative? It's even lower than what the IMF is saying, despite a cut. It's even lower than what this year's projection has been by the finance minister.
Well, I mean, the reason we have done that is that we have been absolutely clear about the list of assumptions that we have made. We have allowed, for example, a significant amount of pulling out of global liquidity by major banks, major central banks. We have allowed for an improvement in the global supply side, but those disruptions will ease themselves out over a course of a year. So we have allowed for several such things, and it is the reasons are very clearly laid out transparently. Now, of course, we will be thrilled if we get GDP growth higher than what we have forecast. But let me point out that even with 8 to 8.5% GDP growth next year, we will be the world's fastest growing economy. So nothing to be sniffed at.
Oh, absolutely. So as your economic survey has also talked about this being India's decade, and I'm going to get to that in just a bit. But where it has been found conservative has been, of course, in GDP forecast, but also what has been said about inflation. It's almost seeming as if you feel inflation is going to be benign when data across the world is showing it is at multi-decade highs. That inflation back home is also going to become an area of concern. For example, when you look at crude oil prices, you're factoring in about $75 a barrel.
Say, we have very clearly, and in fact, we have a whole chapter on the issue of prices. So it's not the case that we have not looked at it. The point that we have made is that inflation in India so far has remained within the threshold band from 2 to 6%. We are, I think, at 5.6 as per the latest reading. So yes, that doesn't mean that inflation is not a concern, because clearly WPI has jumped up into double-digit territory, and even if it comes off because of base effects, it is still high. And there is no question that oil prices are an issue that we watch very carefully. But let me also say that, before people jump on to trying to extrapolate today's oil price of 90 into the future, do remember that just 18 months ago, oil prices were below 20. So, we do need to take into account that it's an extremely volatile number. So rather than try and predict where exactly it will be, we have given a range which we think is reasonable depending on our reading of various experts in this area. And we think 70 to 75 per barrel is a reasonable one, averaging over the next 1 year. We haven't even reached the new financial year. So that is what we expect to happen over the course of the next financial year when it starts. And, you will see from the IMF's numbers that they are expecting GDP growth to have significantly slowed. We are also expecting global liquidity to be tighter. So I don't think it's unreasonable to expect oil price in that range. Having said that, of course, the whole economic survey is about agility and being able to deal with the unpredictable. But that doesn't mean that, conservativeness does not mean that we go to one extreme. Conservativeness means that we take what we think is reasonably sensible to take into account. In this context, I would like, however, to draw people's attention to an interesting section in the economic survey on onion and tomato prices. Every year, this becomes an issue. And sometimes it's the farmers who are complaining that their prices are too low. At other times, consumers complaining that it's too high. So we have done actually an interesting analysis of the seasonality and weather impacts on prices of these two commodities in particular.
You talked about agility and, of course, the bubble theory as well. I thought the tennis fan that you would talk about Rafael Nadal, but of course it was way too close to the economic survey. So that's as far as inflation goes. Now, Sanjeev Sanyal, in your economic survey, you also talked about how there is fiscal space for the government to increase its capex program, expenditure. And the press conference, for example, there was talk about how it's only met 47% of the target, of the budgeted target. I would like to flip that and ask, why isn't the government spending more when we're seeing so many segments of the economy still reeling from the pain of COVID-19 and the lockdown?
So there are two or three things that we need to be clear. First of all, do we have fiscal space to do more, particularly in areas where we have already committed ourselves? Absolutely, particularly on infrastructure, and we are indeed spending. We have, of course, always been responsible about that spending. And do remember that those areas where there are that you are talking about are very often relating to contact intensive services, and we do talk about that in the economic survey. This is really the area where we need to have some concern, and so this is an area where, of course, we do need to provide support. But the fact of the matter is, the best form of support to contact intensive industries ultimately is that we have a buffer against more and more waves of this pandemic. And of course, vaccination is a key to this. And so there's a significant section in the economic survey on vaccination, because only after we have all got vaccinated, and now we are reaching that point, I think it's fair to say that in the next financial year, that we will be quite resilient to further waves. They may happen, but I would take the stand that the economic disruptions that you had in the past are probably no longer going to happen.
In fact, one got a sense from the economic survey that you're also projecting that a lot of the infrastructure spend is going to be as for the railways, and that's perhaps going to be the next big theme for the decade.
This will have to be literally the last question. As you know, your sister channel also is in queue. Well, yes, absolutely. There is a lot of plans to both restructure railways and to spend on expanding it in multiple ways. And a lot of this has happened, by the way, in recent years, but more will be done, particularly in the Northeast. As you know, a lot of expansion is happening into places like Manipur, and that will continue. The stations are getting upgraded in multiple ways, both by the government and through various, bringing in the private sector in various ways. But the railways itself is going through a lot of restructuring. Yes, the railways is a key area, and not just trans-city railways. Remember, metros is also a form of railways, and there's a lot of expansion of metro systems across India, both in, of course, the Delhi NCR has seen a huge amount of expansion, and now we are seeing metro stations, metro systems being rolled out in second-tier cities as well. Incidentally, the last chapter of the economic survey has a lot of maps of the metro system.
That's why we also got the big theme and the big idea from that only, Sanjeev Sanyal. Yes, we are out of time, but I'll urge all our viewers to stay on with the network. Sanjeev Sanyal, the Principal Economic Advisor, is now going to be in conversation with my colleague Rajesh from ET Now Nayantara Rai.